Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Rogerson. I'm one of the co-directors of the ETHICOMP95 conference, and may I take this opportunity of warmly welcoming you to De Montfort University. We believe that this is a significant event in the world of computer ethics, not only here within the United Kingdom, but in the global context. May I make a special welcome to those of you who've travelled from other countries and have travelled considerable distances to participate in this event over the next 3 days. My fellow co-director is Terry Bynum, who I know many of you know. Terry is a world authority in this area. He is a visiting professor at De Montfort University, and he is the director of the Research Centre on Computing and Society at Southern Connecticut State University. Let's now get on to the real issues of this event. I just want to make a few comments about these issues, and then I'll call upon Terry to put some philosophical thought into this. First of all, what exactly do we mean by the world of information systems and information technology? It is a changing world. It's a very powerful changing agent, and it's a situation where these technologies can destroy and create industries and ways of working at the macro and micro level. And we need to be aware of that. We are in a situation where we find that location, geographical location, is no longer an issue. The technologies have almost made that irrelevant. And so where people work doesn't really matter anymore if you've got the technology to back you up. And there are a number of papers in the conference which address that sort of issue. We are now finding very complex super corporations which are operating across the globe. So we have now an issue of size, large organizations, and how those organizations impact on individual citizens within society is very important. We are seeing that because we live in a turbulent society where there is social, political, economic and technological turbulence, it is causing a vast amount of restructuring within all these organizations, which impacts on individuals, which impacts on the way departments are set up, organizational hierarchies, job contents, span of control, social interaction, and so on and so forth. And so I guess with just that list, there is a lot that we can be talking about in the next 3 days, in the next 3 decades. The important thing and I guess here I'm preaching to the converted, is that we within this profession have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to ensure that these technologies are applied in a sensitive way so that they provide the most benefit to the greatest number of people. And hopefully it's conferences like this which will ensure that these sorts of issues are debated and put very high on the agenda of all countries around the world. So that is the context. We're talking about revolution, and we're talking here about information is very much the fuel of modern technological change. almost anything now can be represented by the technology and transported to somewhere else. And it's a situation where the more information a computer can process, the more of the world it can actually turn into information. And that may well be very exciting, but it is also very concerning. New things to do, new ways to do them. And there are lots of people who are talking about how it is now freeing up the individuals. And I guess that a large number of people in this audience would argue about that concept. And hopefully that whole issue of so-called freedom is going to be talked about at length within the conference. So to cut away the hype, yes, we have a technology which is very impressive, but it's technology the problem. A lot of things it claims to do don't actually happen in practice. It does actually drive us apart rather than bring us together in lots of instances. It has made the world move faster, and I don't know whether we actually want to move faster. It fragments us, and it doesn't matter about who it leaves behind. We're in a situation in this country at the moment of cabling up the country so that everybody can get on the internet and do wonderful things. The government has franchised that process out to commercial outfits, and surprisingly, those commercial outfits have only gone for the centres of population. So the rural parts of this country are no longer going to have the same benefits as the populated areas. We're starting to widen the gap. It doesn't always serve everybody's needs. Information is freely available, but there is a price to pay, and we need to be aware of those prices. And we need to say at some point, enough is enough. And the last thing is about the technology. We might think we own the technology, and I guess we do, but we don't control it. All I can say to you is, who of you have actually tried to use HTML? And then you will know exactly what we're talking about in terms of whether we actually control this technology. So there are lots of challenges in the world of work. International competition, we want to use the new technologies. There's this strive for increased quality in terms of products and services. And it's a question of how do you motivate and commit people where they are changing, they're seeing their jobs change. Some of them are going to lose their jobs. Some of them are going to have to force themselves to go into other things. Managing a diverse workforce. We're now in a situation where organisations have people employed across the globe. I was talking to some friends last night, and I was talking about this concept of electronic immigrants. And that is very much part and parcel of the way modern organisations work. And there are lots of ethical issues to consider in that situation. Some of those result in conflict. Some of those are contradictory. And that is where the ethical dilemma lies. So this conference then is about these three dimensions which we just mentioned. The concept of ethical development, where we are using development methodologies, and we are considering how you involve users in the development of systems, and the issues of professionalism in terms of the things that we do for our clients and customers. We're talking about ethical technology, how you can apply the advances in technology, and considering what the ethical issues are in terms of these changing and advancing technologies. And the last thing we're looking at is this business of ethical application, trying to build strategies, ethical strategies, which allow us to apply in an ethically acceptable way these technologies not only today, but tomorrow, and so on into the future. And the question that you really need to ask yourself, the first question, because we are not in a situation where we are absolved of our responsibilities because we just talk technical. The question that we need to ask ourselves is it ethical? And I think that's a good quote from Jeff Walsham in terms of what we need to do. We need to get these issues articulated. We need to get more people involved, and then hopefully we will change things. So if I can ask Terry now to take over and put some conceptual stuff onto that, I guess. Terry Bynum.
Okay, what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about the history of this field and the difficulties in trying to conceive it. It's a constantly changing field, and there's a wide variety of ways that people have used to try to explain what it's all about, what its goals are, what its main concepts are, and so on. And some of the key figures go back as far as the 1940s. There was a professor at MIT University in the 40s named Norbert Wiener, and he not only coined the phrase cybernetics, but in his book Cybernetics, which was published in 1948, about half of the book today would be considered computer ethics in the broad sense of that term. So Norbert Wiener is, in a sense, the founding father of the field of computer ethics as we conceive of it today. There were some science fiction authors, such as Isaac Asimov, who introduced some interesting computer ethics issues into science fiction very early. So in, for example, Asimov's famous book, I, Robot, he has the Code of Ethics for Robots, introduced in 1950. And he, in a number of his writings, explored various aspects of what we would now call computer ethics. However, the word computer ethics was not used until later than that. For a while, computer ethics, as we now know it, wasn't really a field that anyone recognized as a field of study. And there were a few books and a few articles that occurred here and there and so on, but it didn't really get itself organized as a field until the person whom you might call the second founder of the field, whose name is Don Parker, got interested in the computer crimes that became obvious and began to be publicized in the mid to late 1960s. And Don Parker in 1968 was given the assignment by the Association for Computing Machinery to come up with a code of ethics for the ACM. The ACM, as many of you know, is the largest computer professional organization in America. It has about 88,000 members at the moment. And anyway, Don Parker in 1968 headed up a one-person committee at the time to write a code of ethics for the ACM. And by the early 1970s, it had been adopted as the first code of ethics of the ACM. Well, the technology changed so rapidly that by the end of the 70s, it was obvious that a new code of ethics was already necessary, and so it got revised at the end of the 70s, and about 1980, the second version of the ACM code of ethics was put together by the ACM. Finally, the technology evolved again, and this time, the third time, not only the Association for Computing Machinery, but the IEEE, the Institute for Electronic and Electrical Engineers, decided to cooperate. The Computer Society of the IEEE has 50,000 members, many of whom overlap with the 88,000 members of the ACM. So they joined together in a joint task force, and they did a variety of things. One of the things they did was to recommend changes in the curriculum so that for the first time in the history of those professional organizations, they recommended that social and ethical issues be mandatory in computer science and computer engineering university programs. They also put together a task force that is currently underway, headed by Don Gotterbarn, looking into the possibility of licensing of software engineers, with the licensing including a very strong ethical and legal component to it. Okay. Well, that's what was going on the professional side, so to speak, initiated by Don Parker in 1968. But on the academic side, an awful lot was also occurring primarily because of the work of a gentleman named Walter Maynor. Now, Walter Maynor was at Old Dominion University at the time, and he knew about medical ethics and indeed was in the philosophy department, had taught some courses that included medical ethics and so on. And he discovered, well, I'll let him explain it to you, some interesting things about medical ethics issues when computers get involved. And because of that, he basically started the first university module or course on computer ethics, then went around the country in conferences, giving workshops and exciting people like me to join the field. And well, anyway, what was in Walter's mind at the time that he got all this going? Why don't we see what Walter himself has to say about it? Good.
I can tell you about the psychological genesis of computer ethics in my own head. What I discovered when I tried to teach courses in applied philosophy, and particularly applied ethics, or courses in medical ethics that had a computer overtone, is I discovered that when computers get involved in the ethical problem, they often exacerbate the moral problem. In a few cases, they may even create novel moral problems on their own right. So because of the fact that the involvement of computers does heighten the problematic aspect of many ethical dilemmas, and because the computer does occasionally create entirely new ethical issues, for those reasons I thought it was important to have an approach to ethics that would go directly at computing, and that's why I originally put together the concept of the course in computer ethics.
So Walter Maynor's workshops and writings and proddings and puns and jokes on computer ethics spread computer ethics around the academic world in America, and within 4 or 5 years there were 20 or 30 university campuses that were offering computer ethics as a course. And there were conferences that began to have elements of computer ethics included in them, and computer ethics really took off as an academic discipline. Now, at the time he was at Old Dominion, there was a colleague there named Deborah Johnson, and Walter and Deborah got talking about computer ethics, and both expressed their interest in someday putting together a textbook on computer ethics. Walter made a number of changes, moved to Ohio and so on, and in the meantime, Deborah got this terrific position at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and it gave her the opportunity to write the first textbook in computer ethics, called Computer Ethics, and it instantly became the standard textbook. In 1985, the first generation of textbooks came out. One was a collection of readings by Deborah Johnson and Jack Snapper. One was Deborah Johnson's book, and the other was kind of an accident. I was editor of the journal Metaphilosophy at the time, and I put together a special issue on computer ethics. And it turned out that since there wasn't much else out there, a lot of people began to adopt it as a textbook in computer ethics, even though it wasn't intended for that purpose. And of course, it had to be supplemented with a variety of other things. But at any rate, in 1985, suddenly there were 3 things on the market which could serve as a textbook in computer ethics. Now, of course, there are about a dozen of them out there, and many of them are on exhibit here at the conference. Finally, then, to conceive of this field, when Walter introduced it, he had in mind medical ethics and the application of philosophical theories to dilemmas in medical ethics and so on. And so he kind of modeled his conception of computer ethics on that, and that conception is the one that Deborah Johnson essentially adopted for the first textbook in computer ethics. At the same time, however, there were others who were thinking about human values and applying various concepts and theories that were not directly out of philosophy but out of other disciplines. So sociologists like Judy Perol, for example, were applying sociological theory to questions of human value like work and freedom and democracy and wealth and ownership and things like that. And also a very interesting book called The Second Self by Sherry Turkle came out, and it applied the concepts of psychology to computer technology and began to ask, what does the computer do to the psyche when you use it? And does it become a rival to the human psyche? And where is all of this leading with regard to the human soul? So there were a number of very interesting things happening in the mid-'80s, which have now, of course, exploded and become the very dynamic and rapidly changing field that we're calling computer ethics, for want of a better name. Okay, I guess that'll do it for now. We're just about to begin our first couple of papers. So thank you very much for coming, and welcome to ETHICOMP.